Om Namo Narayana. Welcome back. Today we are starting Canto 6 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's right, halfway through the 12 volumes as translated by Swami Prabhupada, or at least the first 10 volumes. We're going to be doing this just a little different than the way I've done the previous 5 cantos. I've always paid attention to time, trying to keep my videos like under 20 minutes, and sometimes I would read a chapter partway through and stop. I've decided instead, for the sake of cohesiveness, both for you as the viewer, but more importantly for me, because there's often long gaps between videos, sometimes a week, it could sometimes be a month, and I do forget things. I have decided that each video will have one chapter, and if it's 10 minutes, 20, 30, that's just the way it's going to be. I'm not going to worry about time as much as I am just getting that one chapter in so we can get the flow of it from start to finish. Hopefully this will be a little better, maybe for you as the viewer, and also I won't forget things. So this is actually going to have less videos than we've ever had before for a Srimad Bhagavatam reading, but they're going to be longer and hopefully just as interesting. I have no idea what I'm encountering in Canto 6. In the last canto, I knew that there was a discussion of Earth in its early days, but from here on out, I honestly have no idea what any of these other cantos are. I've never read them or looked at them. I've not looked into them quite deliberately. So I'm going into this blind. Please do not give me any spoilers. And as always, even though we're reading the Swami Prabhupada translation, I am not doing the purports. I'm just doing the Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's a long discussion that I could get into on why I've chosen to do that. But to just make it simple, I think the most important thing is to just read the scriptures. We spend a lot of time focused on this guru or that guru, whatever, but often we don't read the scriptures. So we're just reading them. And we're gonna forget about the rest. Oh yes, and Baby Yoda's joining us. And President Roosevelt. Anyways, please join me today, Chapter 1, Canto 6. Canto 6 is actually called Prescribed Duties for Mankind. Chapter 1, The History of the Life of Ajamila. Maharaja Pariksit said, "O my lord, O Sukadeva Goswami, you have already described the path of liberation. By following that path, one is certainly elevated gradually to the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, from which one is promoted to the spiritual world along with Lord Brahma. Thus one's repetition of birth and death in the material world ceases. O great sage, unless the living entity is freed from the infection of the material modes of nature, he receives different types of bodies in which to enjoy or suffer, and according to the body, he is understood to have various inclinations. By following these inclinations, he traverses the path called Pravriti Marga, by which one may be elevated to the heavenly planets, as you have already described. You have also described the varieties of hellish life that result from impious activities, and you have also described the first Manvantara, which was presided over by Svayambhuva Manu, the son of Lord Brahma. My dear lord, you have described the dynasties and characteristics of King Priyavrata and King Uttanapada. Lord Vishnu created this material world with various universes, planetary systems, planets and stars, with varied lands, seas, oceans, mountains, rivers, gardens and trees, all with different characteristics. These are divided among this planet Earth, the luminaries in the sky, and the lower planetary systems. You have very clearly described these planets and the living entities who live on them. O greatly fortunate and opulent one, now, please kindly tell me how human beings may be saved from having to enter hellish conditions in which they suffer terrible pains. Sukadeva Goswami replied, My dear king, if before one's next death, whatever impious acts one has performed in this life with his mind, words, and body are not counteracted through proper atonement according to the description of the Manu Samhita and other Dharma Shastras, one will certainly enter the hellish planets after death and undergo terrible suffering, as I have previously described to you. Therefore, before one's next death comes, as long as one's body is strong enough, one should quickly adopt the process of atonement according to Shastras. Otherwise one's time will be lost, and the reactions of his sins will increase. As an expert physician diagnoses and treats a disease according to its gravity, one should undergo atonement according to the severity of one's sins. Maharaja Parikshit then said, One may know that sinful activity is injurious for him because he actually sees that a criminal is punished by the government and rebuked by people in general, and because he hears from scriptures and learned scholars that one is thrown into hellish conditions in the next life for committing sinful acts. Nevertheless, in spite of such knowledge, one is forced to commit sins again and again, even after performing acts of atonement. Therefore, what is the value of such atonement? Sometimes one who is very alert so as not to commit sinful acts is victimized by sinful life again. I therefore consider this process of repeated sinning and atoning to be useless. It is like the bathing of an elephant, for an elephant cleanses itself by taking a full bath, but then throws dust over its head and body as soon as it returns to the land. Sukadeva Goswami replied, My dear king, since acts meant to neutralize impious actions are also fruitive, they will not release one from the tendency to act fruitively. Persons who subject themselves to the rules and regulations of atonement are not at all intelligent. Indeed, they are in the mode of darkness. Unless one is freed from the mode of darkness, trying to counteract one action through another is useless, because this will not uproot one's desires. Thus, even though one may superficially seem pious, he will undoubtedly be prone to act impiously. Therefore, real atonement is enlightenment in perfect knowledge, Vedanta, by which one understands the supreme absolute truth. If a diseased person eats the pure, uncontaminated food prescribed by a physician, he is gradually cured, and the infection of disease can no longer touch him. Similarly, if one follows the regulative principles of knowledge, he gradually progresses towards liberation from material contamination. To concentrate the mind, one must observe a life of celibacy and not fall down. One must undergo the austerity of voluntarily giving up sense enjoyment. One must then control the mind and senses, give charity, be truthful, clean, and non-violent, follow the regulative principles, and regularly chant the holy name of the Lord. Thus, the sober and faithful person who knows the religious principles is temporarily purified of all sins performed with his body, minds, and words. These sins are like the dried leaves of creepers beneath a bamboo tree, which may be burned by fire, although their roots remain to grow again at the first opportunity. Only a rare person who has adopted complete, unalloyed devotional service to Krishna can uproot the weeds of sinful actions with no possibility that they will revive. He can do this simply by discharging devotional service, just as the sun can immediately dissipate fog by its rays. My dear king, if a sinful person engages in the service of a bona fide devotee of the Lord, and thus learns how to dedicate his life unto the lotus feet of Krishna, he can be completely purified. One cannot be purified merely by undergoing austerity, penance, brahmacharya, and the other methods of atonement I have previously described. The path followed by pure devotees, who are well behaved and fully endowed with the best qualifications, is certainly the most auspicious path in the material world. It is free from fear and is authorized by the Shastras. as a pot containing liquor cannot be purified even if washed in the waters of many rivers, non-devotees cannot be purified by processes of atonement even if they perform them very well. Although not having fully realized Krishna, persons who have even once surrendered and completely unto his lotus feet, and who have become attracted to his name, form, qualities, and pastimes, are completely freed of all sinful reactions, for they have thus accepted the true method of atonement. Even in dreams, such surrendered souls do not see Yamaraja or his order carriers, who are equipped with ropes to bind the sinful. In this regard, learned scholars and saintly persons describe a very old historical incident involving a discussion between the order carriers of Lord Vishnu and those of Yamaraja. Please hear this story from me now. In the city known as Kanyakubja, there was a Brahmana named Ajamila, who married a prostitute maid-servant and lost all his Brahminical qualities because of the association of that low-class woman. This fallen Brahmana gave trouble to others by arresting them, by cheating them in gambling, or by directly plundering them. This was the way he earned his livelihood and maintained his wife and children. While he thus spent his time in abominable, sinful activities to maintain his family of many sons, 88 years of his life passed by. That old man, Ajamila, had 10 sons, of whom the youngest was a baby named Narayana. Since Narayana was the youngest of all his sons, he was naturally very dear to both his mother and father. Because of the child's broken language and awkward movements, old Ajamila was very much attached to him. He always took care of the child and enjoyed the child's activities. When Ajamila chewed food and ate it, he called the child to chew food and eat. And when he drank, he called the child to drink also. Always engaged in taking care of the child and calling his name Narayana, Ajamila could not understand that his own time was now exhausted and that death was upon him. When the time of death arrived for the foolish old man, he began thinking exclusively of his little son Narayana. Ajamila then saw 3 awkward persons with deformed bodily features, fierce twisted faces, and their hair standing erect on their bodies. With ropes in their hands, they had come to take him away to the abode of Yamaraja. When he saw them, he was extremely bewildered, and because of the attachment to the child, who was playing a short distance away, Ajamila began to call him loudly by name. Thus, with tears in his eyes, he somehow or other chanted the holy name of Narayana. The order carriers of Vishnu, the Vishnu Dutas, immediately arrived when they heard the holy name of their master from the mouth of the dying Ajamila, who had certainly chanted without offense, because he had chanted in complete anxiety. The order carriers of Yamaraja were snatching the soul from the core of the heart of Ajamila, the husband of the prostitute, but with resounding voices the messengers of Lord Vishnu forbade them to do so. When the order carriers of Yamaraja, the son of the sun god, were thus forbidden, they replied, "Who are you, sirs, that have the audacity to challenge the jurisdiction of Yamaraja? Whose servants are you? Where have you come from, and why are you forbidding us to touch the body of Ajamila? Are you demigods from the heavenly planets? Are you sub-demigods? Or are you the best of devotees? Your eyes are just like petals of lotus flowers. Dressed in yellow silken garments, decorated with garlands of lotuses, and wearing very attractive helmets on your heads and earrings in your ears, you all appear fresh and youthful. Your 4 long arms are decorated with bows and quivers of arrows, and with swords, clubs, conch shells, discs, and lotus flowers. Your effulgence has dissipated the darkness of this place with extraordinary illumination. Now, sirs, why are you obstructing us?" Being thus addressed by the messengers of Yamaraja, the servants of Vasudeva smiled and spoke the following words in voices as deep as the sound of rumbling clouds. The blessed messengers of Lord Vishnu, the Vishnu Dutas, said, "If you are actually servants of Yamaraja, you must explain to us the meaning of religious principles and the symptoms of irreligion. What is the process of punishing others? Who are the actual candidates for punishment? Are all karmis engaged in fruitive activities punishable, or only some of them?" The Yamadutas replied, "That which is prescribed in the Vedas constitutes dharma, the religious principles, and the opposite of that is irreligion. The Vedas are directly Lord Vishnu, Narayana, and are self-born. Thus, this we have heard from Yamaraja. The supreme cause of all causes, Narayana, is situated in his own abode in the spiritual world, but nevertheless he controls the entire cosmic manifestation according to the three modes of material nature, Sattvaguna, Rajaguna, and Tamoguna. In this way, all living entities are awarded different qualities, different names, different duties, according to the Varnashrama institution, and different forms. Thus, Narayana is the cause of the entire cosmic manifestation. The sun, fire, sky, air, demigods, moon, evening, day, night, directions, water, land, and Supersoul himself are all witness to the activities of the living entity. The candidates for punishment are those who are confirmed by these many witnesses to have deviated from their prescribed regulative duties. Everyone engaged in fruitive activities is suitable to be subjected to punishment according to his sinful acts. O inhabitants of Vaikuntha, you are sinless, but those within this material world are karmis, whether acting piously or impiously. Both kinds of action are possible for them because they are contaminated by the three modes of nature and must act accordingly. One who has accepted a material body cannot be inactive, and sinful action is inevitable for one acting under the modes of material nature. Therefore, all the living entities within this material world are punishable. In proportion to the extent of one's religious or irreligious actions in this life, one must enjoy or suffer the corresponding reactions of his karma in the next. O best of the demigods, we can see three different varieties of life which are due to the contamination of the three modes of nature. The living entities are thus known as peaceful, restless, and foolish, as happy, unhappy, or in between, or as religious, irreligious, and semi-religious. We can deduce that in the next life, these three kinds of material nature will similarly act. Just as springtime in the present indicates the nature of springtimes in the past and future, so this life of happiness, distress, or a mixture of both gives evidence concerning the religious and irreligious activities of one's past and future lives. The omnipotent Yamaraja is as good as Lord Brahma, for while situated in his own abode, or in everyone's heart, like the Paramatma, he mentally observes the past actions of a living entity and thus understands how the living entity will act in future lives. As a sleeping person acts according to the body manifested in his dreams, and accepts it to be himself, so one identifies with his present body, which he acquired because of his past religious or irreligious actions, and is unable to know his past or future lives. Above the five senses of perception, the five working senses, and the five objects of the senses, is the mind, which is the 16th element. Above the mind is the 17th element, the soul, the living being himself, who, in cooperation with the other 16, enjoys the material world alone. The living being enjoys three kinds of situations, namely happy, distressful, and mixed. The subtle body is endowed with 16 parts, the 5 knowledgeable, acquiring senses, the 5 working senses, the 5 objects of sense gratification, and the mind. This subtle body is an effect of the three modes of material nature. It is composed of insurmountably strong characteristics, and therefore it causes the living entity to transmigrate from one body to another in human life, animal life, and life as a demigod. When the living entity gets the body of a demigod, he is certainly very jubilant. When he gets the human body, he is always in lamentation, and when he gets the body of an animal, he is always afraid. In all conditions, however, he is actually miserable. His miserable condition is called samsriti, or transmigration in material life. The foolish, embodied, living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature against his desires. He is like a silkworm that uses its own saliva to create a cocoon and then becomes trapped in it, with no possibility of getting out. The living entity traps himself in a network of his own fruitive activities, and then can find no way to release himself. Thus, he is always bewildered, and repeatedly he dies. Not a single living entity can remain unengaged, even for a moment. One must act by his natural tendency according to the three modes of material nature, because this natural tendency forcibly makes him work in a particular way. The fruitive activities a living being performs, whether pious or impious, are the unseen cause for the fulfillment of his desires. This unseen cause is the root for the living entity's different bodies. Because of his intense desire, the living entity takes birth in a particular family and receives a body which is either like that of his mother or his father. The gross and subtle bodies are created according to this desire. Since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. But if in the human form of life he is taught how to associate with Lord Vishnu or his devotee, this position can be overcome. In the beginning, this Brahmana, named Ajamila, studied all the Vedic literatures. He was a reservoir of good character, good conduct, and good qualities. Firmly established in executing all the Vedic injunctions, he was very mild and gentle, and he kept his mind and senses under control. Furthermore, he was always truthful. He knew how to chant the Vedic mantras, and he was also very pure. Ajamila was very respectful to his spiritual master, the fire god, guests, and the elderly members of his household. Indeed, he was free from false prestige. He was upright, benevolent to all living beings, and well-behaved. He would never speak nonsense or envy anyone. Once this Brahmana, Ajamila, following the order of his father, went to the forest to collect fruit, flowers, and two kinds of grass called Samit and Kusha. On the way home, he came upon a Shudra, a very lusty fourth-class man who was shamelessly embracing and kissing a prostitute. The Shudra was smiling, singing, and enjoying as if this were proper behavior. Both the Shudra and the prostitute were drunk. The prostitute's eyes were rolling in intoxication, and her dress had become loose. Such was the condition in which Ajamila saw them. The Shudra, his arms decorated with turmeric powder, was embracing the prostitute. When Ajamila saw her, the dormant, lusty desires in his heart awakened, and in illusion he fell under their control. As far as possible, he patiently tried to remember the instructions of the Shastras, not even to see a woman. With the help of this knowledge and his intellect, he tried to control his lusty desires, but because of the force of Cupid within his heart, he failed to control his mind. In the same way that the sun and moon are eclipsed by a low planet, the Brahmana lost all his good sense. Taking advantage of the situation, he always thought of the prostitute, and within a short time he took her as a servant in his house and abandoned all the regulative principles of a Brahmana. Thus Ajamila began spending whatever money he had inherited from his father to satisfy the prostitute with various maternal presentations so that she would remain pleased with him. He gave up all his Brahmanical activities to satisfy her, because his intelligence was pierced by the lustful glance of the prostitute, the victimized Brahmana engaged in sinful acts in her association. He even gave up the company of his very beautiful young wife, who came from a very respectable Brahmana family. Although born of a Brahmana family, this rascal, bereft of intelligence because of the prostitute's association, earned money somehow or other, regardless of whether properly or improperly, and used it to maintain the prostitute's sons and daughters. This Brahmana irresponsibly spent his long lifetime transgressing all the rules and regulations of the Holy Scripture, living extravagantly and eating food prepared by a prostitute. Therefore, he is full of sins. He is unclean and is addicted to forbidden activities. This man did not undergo atonement. Therefore, because of his sinful life, we must take him now into the presence of Yamaraja for punishment. There, according to the extent of his sinful acts, he will be punished and thus purified. Thus ends chapter 1. Just two very brief thoughts. Last line, he will be punished and purified. Please make note of that. The Christian view is you will be taken to hell and punished. That's it. If you go back into Canto 5, you will find a discussion of hell, and you will take note that for us who believe the system and in Sanatana Dharma and whatever, this is not permanent. You go to hell, and you are purified, and then you reincarnate again. And you do the whole thing over and over again until eventually you're not going to hell anymore, you're going to the heavenly planets. So don't think that this is like Christianity or Judaism, perhaps Islam. It is not. Hell is not like the Yamaraja and the devil aren't really equivalent. We try to mix them up in this universalist thing, but they're really not. They're really two different beings ruling over two very different situations. Yamaraja is just a temporary overseer for people in a temporary place. Now, temporary might be 100 years, it might be millenniums, but eventually you will leave hell. There are exceptions to that rule. There are some people who are sent away, but usually the gods are involved. And in most of our deaths, Vishnu isn't going to appear in the clouds. That's the first point. The second point is, this Ajamila kind of disappoints me. It doesn't really make sense. So at the end, we find out that he studied all these scriptures, and he was a great guy, and he was also a Brahmana, and he was married, because Brahmanas could be married, and he had children. But he saw a lusty woman with her clothes off, or on the way off, and he was like, "Whoa, I've forgotten all my stuff. I don't know what to do anymore." And he takes her as a servant, and eventually we assume starts banging her, and then starts living a horrible life and doing all these horrible things. This actually makes no sense. My view is this Brahmana actually probably has some other problems. If just by looking at a naked woman, he completely changes his life. Think about it. Have you ever looked at any porn? Or, not even porn. Have you ever watched a movie and suddenly there's a naked woman in it? Maybe it's just a flash of one. Frida. The Frida Kahlo story. There's a scene, she's banging another woman. It's very, very brief. And it's not pornographic. Well, I mean, you see a lot, but it's very artsy. Have you ever watched that scene and went, "Oh my God," and just abandoned your wife, abandoned your kids, went out and became a drug dealer and just gave up on everything and forgot everything you ever knew about life? No, probably not. Why? Because you've seen a naked woman before. You have a wife. This Brahmana's married. He's obviously seen a naked woman. Why looking at another one would make him go bonkers? This makes no sense to me. And he would forget everything he's ever been taught just by seeing a boob. So obviously this guy has some issues and should be in therapy if he's going to throw away his entire life and become a criminal just by seeing a boob. Sometimes the Srimad Bhagavatam and other scriptures for me don't quite have a sense of, well, they don't quite feel realistic. I mean, if this guy is so converted to the dark side by just seeing a little bit of flesh, he was never there to begin with. He was never a saint to begin with, if he's just converted just by that much. Otherwise, 100% of monks in the world would be done, because there is no way a monk in the world, even if they don't associate with women, can never not see a woman in some way, shape, or form, unless they live in the monastery and never go outside. But if they read a book, if they read a story like this, here's a story, and it's describing, oh, this woman had no clothes off. Well, what's the first thing you do when you read book? Your brain starts working. You can't tell me a monk is sitting there going, oh, a woman with no clothes on, and doesn't picture it in his head. Of course he does. It's natural. When you read books, you picture them in your head. That's why many of us like books versus movies. And so you can't tell me a monk has never read a book and seen this and thought what a woman looks like, or even questioned, well, I wonder what a woman looks like. I'm sure 100% of them have. So it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. So this guy obviously has bigger issues. He's not the perfect person we think he is. This is a bad example. But the rest of the chapter is an interesting look at reincarnation, past lives, and how we avoid reincarnation. We have here a couple pages giving us instructions on how not to do the wheel of time, as the Buddhists say, over and over and over again. How not to reincarnate. So, ignoring the little details, which I point out being a writer, and I see from my writer's eye, ignoring those, this is actually a really interesting chapter, and it's off to a roll right away with some theology. So I will pause here. We have our longest video to date, but hopefully you enjoyed that reading if it was long and it just flowed very well. And so we're just going to keep going on this approach and get through the whole book in, 19 videos. It's going to go by so fast. But some of them are long, like day, others are very short. But we'll see. That being said, I was going to say thank you for joining me on this new journey, Canto 6 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai Shri Krishna, Om Namo Narayanaya.